This episode is sponsored by a company who has truly found a solution to an age-old problem, and that is Karna bunker gear. One of the most prevalent conversations in the fire service is should we or should we not train in our bunker gear? Now, the answer to both is yes. As most of us are aware, the carcinogens from structure fires, of which there are over 260 that are dangerous to human health, not to mention the PFAS and other chemicals that are within our gear from the manufacturing process, are factors that we obviously want to minimize. Now, the other side of the coin is that we do need to train in our gear. There is no way to acclimatize the heat retention and lack of mobility than to actually wear the gear. So seeing this problem himself, firefighter and exercise physiologist Ryan Conley developed a carcinogen-free gear at a much lower cost that can be used in non-IDLH atmosphere and training that does not require puncture or tear resistance. Now, as someone who always trained in gear myself throughout my career, I wish this technology was around then. And I got to test it personally while coaching my tactical athlete class a few weeks ago, and can testify that it not only simulates the heat retention of frontline gear, but also the lack of mobility, which is imperative at operating at a high level on the fireground. Now, some additional benefits include being able to doff the gear when you do get banged out for a call, increasing the lifespan of your frontline bunker gear, and then also public education. Think of the number of times that we allow, for example, school children to wear our gear when it's infused with all these carcinogens. So there are so many real-world applications for a fraction of the cost of IDLH-rated bunker gear. So if you want to hear the whole story behind this, listen to my conversation with Ryan Conley on episode 1175 of the Behind the Shield podcast, or go to karnabunkergear.com. Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name's James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show veteran of the fire service, training chief, and instructor, Brian Brush. Now, in this conversation, we discuss a host of topics, from his journey into the world of volunteer firefighting, his transition into wildland, USAR training, firefighter fitness, his near-fatal cardiac incident, mentorship, recruitment, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of well over 1,200 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So with that being said, I introduce to you Brian Brush. Enjoy. Well, Brian, I want to start by saying two things. Firstly, thank you to the numerous people that have recommended that I bring you on the show. We were talking before I hit record. Your name has come up many, many times, and the universe has obviously decided for this to be when the conversation happens. So thank you to everyone that's mentioned you before. And then I want to welcome you onto the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Well, I'm excited, man. I like we were talking about offline. I think everybody, it's been really cool. I've been following your work. So many of my friends have had conversations with you, and we've been in each other's orbit. But this is the first time we're sitting down, and man, I'm already having a great day. We just finished up 4 evolution burns with our new guys, so I'm kind of at lunch right now, but still smelling like smoke, and I'm excited to have a good conversation with you, man.
Brilliant. I miss that smell. I really do. My wife laughs because I'll smell a wildfire, when I leave the house, and I'll get what I call a fire boner, and she just doesn't get it. All right. Well, very first question, where on planet Earth are we finding you this afternoon?
I'm in Midwest City, Oklahoma, which is a suburb kind of Oklahoma City. It's just on the east side of Oklahoma City. It's about population of about 60,000, 25 square miles. We neighbor, obviously, Oklahoma City, Del City, a few kind of smaller towns around us. And then our biggest neighbor is Tinker Air Force Base. So we're kind of right here in the flight path of the Air Force's maintenance shop. So we're a very, I like to call it a red, white, and blue collar city. We're a very kind of patriotic and hardworking town. And man, we're having a great time here. The department is 6 stations, about 80 uniformed people, and I'm blessed to be the training chief here, housed out of the training division.
Beautiful. Well, we'll definitely get to how you found yourself there, because I know it's an interesting story, your own fire service journey. Let's start at the very beginning, though. So tell me where you were born, and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings.
Well, I was born in Northern California. I was actually the first generation born outside of San Francisco in about four generations. My family kind of deep rooted in San Francisco's history, as far as even having a lumber yard around the time of the gold rush. So kind of a cool to have that background. Grew up in Sonoma County, California, and kind of a small rural area. People think of California as, LA and these big cities, but the place I grew up was pretty rural. We had kids traveling as far as 2 hours to get to the high school. My graduating high school class was about 100 kids. So kind of a small area, but really tight community. That's how I got started. Got started as a volunteer in high school. The pagers would go off. We'd get to leave high school and run down to the firehouse and jump on the rig and support the community that way. So I was hooked on the fire service at 16, which I always kind of joke is like 2 years before any military recruiter could get to me. And I just made that my path. I out of high school, went to college at Oklahoma State to pursue the 4-year program there. It was awesome, really, really good program, but I didn't quite have the math for an engineering degree. So I left in my junior year and picked up a job at West Metro Fire outside of Denver, and spent 14 years there. It was an incredible department, so diverse. I mean, from real urban stuff that right on the border of Denver up into, wildland urban interface, and it was pretty much Lakewood, Littleton, Morrison, kind of the western suburbs of Denver. Got a lot of great experience there. Spent a majority of my time kind of in a double company, truck company, or rescue company house. A lot of great tech rescue experience. Spent some time with the USAR team, Colorado Task Force 1. I left there as a lieutenant paramedic in 2015. The department was really struggling with a lot of financial issues, was making a lot of cuts. Actually, the year I left, the department cut 24 positions, which was just a wild thing to experience. Your friends getting demoted and the department shifting around. We were on a 2-year hiring freeze. I mean, I learned a lot about a lot of things during that period. And I know you but you kind of expose some mental health and challenges and leadership challenges and all those impacts. And man, we went through it during that time period. If we choose to talk about it, we will. But long story short, in 2015, my wife, she had kind of always wanted to move back to Oklahoma. Around that time, I told her, you know what, this is a good time. The department's not doing that great. If I step aside, someone else can get their position back. And, I'm young enough that I can start over, and the kids are young enough that it's not going to impact them a whole lot. So let's give it a try. And in 2015, we moved back to Oklahoma. I actually started over as a recruit firefighter at Edmond Fire Department, went through a 20-week academy, and that was a humbling and, but also cathartic experience to start back over. And that's really where I got my spark to get into training again. I kind of was really driven by operations, but to go through an academy and start over and be side by side with these kids learning this for the first time, I really kind of did a deep dive and found a passion for really training and educating and developing people. And be it as it may, at the end of my probationary year, the department was adding another position to the training division, and the guys pushed me to take it. So at a 1-year firefighter, went straight into the training division and spent 3 years in the training division at Edmond. before I landed the training chief job here at Midwest City in 2019. And I've been here since and absolutely loving it. And my role in the training division, I run the training division, recently added a training captain here down at the drill ground. And then I also respond basically as kind of the second chief on major incidents throughout the day. So still have a hand in operations, and I'm just really having a great time.
Brilliant. Well, we will definitely hit a lot of those benchmarks, but I'm going to drag you all the way back to your childhood again. So firstly, what about your parents? What were they doing profession-wise?
Oh, that's right. You said my family dynamic. So I'm blessed again to have very, very blue collar parents. My dad was a commercial contractor, very handyman. He, believe it or not, he went to school at Berkeley in architecture, Cal Berkeley in architecture, but kind of could not give up the passion for actually building things. He's a very artistic and talented man, but he's a builder at heart. So he was a commercial contractor. And then my mother is a PE teacher. She's been a teacher her whole life. Just been great. My sister, I have a younger sister, 2 years younger. She ended up in Colorado as well, a degree in construction management. So really, really great family dynamics growing up. We didn't have it easy, but learned a lot all together. Had a really great support network all the way up to my grandparents. So it's been it was a great childhood growing up in Northern California. Got exposed to a lot of things, and really kind of interesting, being really rural area where we grew up. But then my grandparents still living in San Francisco. We'd go back and we'd certainly get exposed to all parts of San Francisco. Them having been there for so long, really knew the ins and outs of the city. And man, I just love walking around that city to all the neighborhoods, and still love that urban environment. And then me personally, I have 3 children, married to my wife for 23 years now. And I've got my oldest fallen in the fire service. He's at Oklahoma State in the fire program. I got a daughter who's a junior in high school, and a son who's a freshman.
It's really interesting that your dad went to Berkeley to study architecture, but the calling to actually use his hands was the ultimate, draw. And I think it does parallel that lifelong question in the fire service, especially when you start looking at promotions. How much should we value something like a degree versus the hands-on operational experience and the simple ability to actually lead from the front?
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, I think, I think that's something that I'm so drawn to in the fire service too, is that, it is, one, I guess, umbrella, but there are so many ways to pursue your passions in the fire service. And, I think that's kind of interesting, on my dad's end as well. It's like, well, he was obviously drawn to something in buildings and those types of things, and wanted to learn how they worked, basically through architecture. But ultimately, if you're a doer, you're a doer, and you really want to build those things. And you can't, while you may be drawn by either education or practicality, you really can't deny your internal passion for something. And if you do, it's going to cost you eventually. So I'm glad that he maybe chose his passion and a fulfilling life rather than chasing money in architecture, something that maybe wouldn't really take care of him at his core.
What about from the fire service specifically? What is your perspective on how much we lean into college classes or even officer classes versus that time in the station, time on the rig, and ability to lead?
It's really interesting. And I mean, there's so many different models outside of the U.S. We kind of say we're paramilitary, and because we're not quite military. And I think the para difference is that, we don't have that enlisted and that officer breakover. And I do know that a lot of other kind of federalized fire services around the world, the officers and the enlisted, if you will, they go through the same kind of initial training, but they're onboarded in different tracks. The degree plan puts you into that officer track, and, the kind of just the non-commissioned, so it is interesting in the U.S. how we do things. And I think it's, again, at its core, a blue collar job. We definitely do probably value experience above education. And my wife says the same thing. I've kind of tongue in joke said, well, there's guys with high school educations making $150,000 in the fire service. And she says, yes, but you guys are so technical and physical that it would be really tough to balance that out with education. So, and even in institutional knowledge, you'll find people who are really successful in one agency and they absolutely fail in another because the institutional knowledge has so much value. But I'm not sure if I'm tracking it, but I've always been a nerd. I believe in balancing education and experience. I'm the type who believes that I've always wanted to be that academic All-American, both a really talented athlete and a highly educated person. So I don't want to discredit or give greater weight to one or the other. I know people do push for greater education in the fire service, and I think that's more a desire to professionalize than it is to educate. I think there's a lot different models for education in the fire service that we could pursue and create greater professional development. That isn't necessarily just putting somebody through a degree program for the sake of a degree.
I just interviewed Jake Ricks, the hazmat guru, and he made a really interesting observation about the chief position. Should that be someone who actually has more of a business grooming that understands, budgets and the financial side? Because one of the things that's just clearly evident in the fire services at the moment is the wasted money downstream, and yet it seems like it's such a hard sell. And this is not just on our chiefs, this is on the CFOs of these cities and these counties that don't seem to be able to see the tens of millions that are being lost in lack of retention and overtime and workman's comp premiums, etc. So, and I'd never thought of it that way. Yet when we go to fire academy and you take your officer classes and then one day you're at the helm, have you really got that organizational training, that truly organizational training that someone running a business would have that can really understand, the bigger picture and, proactive economics and some of these other areas I sure as hell don't understand. But, are we preparing even our top tier officers properly for their position?
Oh, we're not at all. I mean, and that's again, I think that it's a cliff, dude. I've seen countless great friends get pushed off the cliff. I call it. You're an incredible operator, but you're a terrible administrator, and there's no on ramp from one to the other. And it is crazy. I mean, you've got to. You'll have this position. You'll go straight from operations and maybe being a deputy chief of operations, overseeing battalion chiefs, discussing operational components all day long, and then the next week you're in the administrative office, and now you have to interact with all these other department heads from across the city. You're dealing with a budget of $12 million, and you may have never managed a budget at all. At least me in the training division, I'm currently managing a budget of about $150,000 a year. I'm running a calendar, an organization. I interact with other agencies and stuff, but that is a tough thing. And I do agree that there needs to be probably more business mindset when you get up into that 5 bugle area. And guys will knock it. They'll say, these executive fire officer programs and all this type of stuff, they'll say that's a bunch of BS, but it's like I think that is a way to classify it. It is an executive position. It's not an operational position. But I don't know, so many organizations don't have that chief of administration role, that deputy chief of administration, where you're kind of starting to develop the skill sets and the interactions to become that fire chief level person. But it's tough, buddy, because a lot of times we put the failure on the person, but I think there is a lot in failing in preparation, in the environment for them. We're not setting them up for success by thinking just because they're talented in one area, they're not in another. We see that all the time just with humans alone. They're either mechanically inclined or they're people. So a lot of times guys that are great at driving a rig really are not great with being a leader and managing different personalities and those types of things too.
Going to your mom, interesting perspective as well. As a full career in PE, I've said this many times. If we really acknowledge the impact of the pandemic. As we emerged, you would have seen PE programs bolstered, real food served in schools and soda machines removed, and local farmers bolstered, and pedestrianizing of downtowns, fitness standards in the fire service. But we didn't see any of that stuff. And I think it's such a lost lesson that we are now exactly where we were before, a very obese population that's vulnerable for the next, whatever it's going to be called, Steve, the virus that sweeps through our planet. But the support, I think, one of the places that we can really make a difference, if there isn't that support at home, if mom and dad are not out there and they're active and they're gym members or, whatever it is, so the kids, that's their norm, which I see in a lot of the kids in the gym where I train, then the school is the only other place that they can actually get that kind of environment and inspiration. What has been her perspective of PE, the support of, and, if she's ever even discussed it, what it should look like in 2026?
No, I mean, I think it's amazing. It's one of those, it's so interesting to me because I feel like it has kind of gone in waves. When she first got into, being a PE teacher, there was a lot of jobs, that was a physical fitness was very much a standard, in the schools for a long time. But, as budget crunches happen and, her being, over that time period in the 90s, she went from being a PE teacher at a single school to being the PE teacher for multiple schools. And she would, be basically providing that service, for a 2-hour period at this one school and then another school, whereas, so many schools, it was supposed to be all day long. And I think we've seen that in music too. When I grew up, there was a period in 5th grade, everybody had to do music. I was just joking with the kids the other day. I'm like, when I started out with the violin and that was miserable. And then I tried the trumpet and I couldn't figure that out. So I ended up being a trombone player because that was like the most simple, instrument to play. But like music programs have gone away. At the same time, I will say, my kids' high school right now, they all do weights or physical fitness. It's a mandatory thing, but I just don't know the level of attention to it. And man, you're absolutely correct. I wish there was more value in that, because kids are so influenced, and I'm thankful that I had parents that exposed me to as much as they could, even probably at the expense of their own things that they could be doing. But there's so few kids that get any exposure at home, the latchkey kids and that type of stuff, that I really wish everyone could always get music, arts, and fitness in school beyond just the normal traditional education, because those are where so many people's passions lie. And if you don't see them, then you're just not going to be inspired by them. My youngest right now, he's really, really interested in sports performance and all that type of stuff. And he gets exposed to that because, part of his physical fitness is being with the football team and in their strength program as like a class. But if he wasn't in sports, who knows? I don't know what physical fitness he would be exposed to.
What were you playing when you were in school age?
Like I said, I was sports wise.
Yeah.
Oh, sports wise, I played everything, man. My elementary school graduating class was about 40 kids. So if you wanted to play football, basketball, soccer, baseball, you just kind of did it all. So I played every sport that I could, and some of that was like, again, because I wanted to do something after school that wasn't just going home, and I wanted to be all around my friends. And that's something that is, again, so hard for me to make the switch, because I've been so imprinted on networking is in person, and sports and all these things that we accessed were just ways for us to be around our friends, because if you went home, you had no contact with anybody. Today, it's different. People are able to communicate and contact without being in person. So I'm kind of not surprised that sports and all these, extracurricular activities are kind of falling by the wayside, because there's other avenues for people to connect.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we're having this conversation virtually, so that's a
exactly.
a good side of this technology.
Yeah,
but you have to have that in person as well. And I think this is what I like about the gym that I train at. It used to be a CrossFit gym. Now it's a strength and conditioning gym. There's jiu-jitsu and striking, and then it's the Wolf Brigade programming. But it's the same thing. It's a big building with a load of people all working out at the same time. So you have that community when you go. So it's okay to do the virtual thing as long as you've got spaces, jiu-jitsu, soccer, whatever it is that you like doing where you are, in person. But we got to remind ourselves a lot of these kids were in school during COVID, and when they were told don't see anyone, and then they were given all these subsidies, and then one day they were like, go back to work. What are you doing? Why are you so lazy? And we just cut the legs off these poor kids, and then wonder why they struggle to communicate. Because you and I got to grow up, when you got on your bike and you went to whichever house had all the other bikes out, and you go hang out with everyone and play football in the park. We had this virtual age that literally for a year and a half weren't allowed to even leave their home, basically. Yeah. And then we wonder why they struggle to communicate.
And I think we, as adults, I see it in people who coach kids, obviously coming up and watching my kids play sports. I see it as a parent every now and then. I recognize it too. It's like we always say, oh, the kids don't understand, because we think we have this bigger view of life and the world and all this type of stuff. And we kind of dismiss them. But man, we don't understand, to a 10-year-old, a year of COVID was a tenth of their life, mm-hmm. And I mean, that's a big deal. You put that in perspective, that would have been 4 years for us at 40 years old, so, and then same thing. It's like my son, he has a bad game and he's just beating himself up almost to the point of being in tears. And you're like, come on, man, it's just football. But, to him, that's his whole life. He doesn't have a girlfriend. He's not driving. He's not worried about finances. Like there's no other thing that reduces that to a small part of his life. That is his life. So I agree, man. I think that's very, I think that's lost on a lot of people. Your deep empathy for the impact that it had on children, and your understanding and comprehension of how much that has changed and influenced their life, because they are so impressionable. I mean, that age, you're just so impressionable, and what is fed into you and around you and told to you is going to make a big difference. And we may see that some of those kids really don't recover from that, or they're just not able to shake it. It was a prolonged traumatic event, not an acute traumatic event. And it's tough.
It's interesting. As a Gen Xer, I'm 52, I just turned it.
Yeah.
We've literally got one foot on either side of the technological age. Most of my early life, there was none. There was rotary phones and, cassette answer machines and all those things. And then as we sit here now, obviously we're doing this, over the internet with all this technology. And then I'm going to do, AI generated, subtitles and all the things. So we're in this profession now, this age. But we are the gatekeepers of this information. And what's interesting, I don't know if your kids are doing this, but there's this leaning into the 1980s, 1990s culture from this young generation. And rather than roll your eyes and say, oh, well, the problem is kids today, they don't want to whatever, which we see some of our peers do. It's up to us to be like, well, let me tell you about all the good stuff of when I was young. There was some shit stuff too. So let me just, understand there was some bad things, but let's go back to that. And this is what I was able to do with my son, just because of where I lived. He would go out all day and then come back when the streetlights came on, because we had the community, the ability to do that. So how can we as Gen X try and create the environment that we grew up with so that these young people can start experiencing that again? Because they're our children. They were raised with these devices. So it's on us to remember how amazing life was when you just, literally got on a bike and fell over and scraped your knee and, played football in the rain, and try and infuse that back into their environment rather than watch it continue to spiral down into a complete lack of communication because everyone's just stuck on their phone.
Well, I love, man, you just set this up perfect for me, because I love how this is. And it's neat because we did straddle, the technological world, or what do they call them? digital natives now. They call anybody who is born after a certain period of time digital natives, meaning that their whole life it had this connected device, and we didn't. And what's kind of interesting about that is we don't yearn for tangible things, because we still have photo albums, we still have books, we still have all this time. I still have my CD collection. I can't play it in anything, but I still have my CD collection of my '90s rap and all '90s country, all this stuff. And I'm like, man, this is awesome. But anyway, I digress. My kids have really gotten into records, because it's like it's tangible, and I never thought about it. I'm like, well, why are they getting into this? It's like, well, they've only had digital music, and there is just something cool about having something in your hands that's actually tangible. And in our house, we've got the record player in the living room, and they've got their albums. I've got mine. What's funny is that connection to the '90s. Like a lot of the stuff that they want to buy at the thrift stores and stuff is from us, So it's like they want to throw on the Pearl Jam album or Jack Johnson or Metallica or something like that. We put it on and we just kind of hang out in the living room or in the kitchen listening to records, and that's a pretty cool way, like us in our own family. But to take that to the fire service, it's like, again, people dismissive of the new generation. It's like, man, they are hungry for physical active things, because even in their schooling, most of their schooling in the classroom is done on, Chromebooks or this type of stuff. They're not even hands to paper. So I've found that our last sets of recruits, man, they cannot get enough hands-on activity. They're perfectly content to watch a YouTube video to see something, but man, they are so hungry. If we decided to run this recruit class until 9 o'clock at night, as long as hose was on the ground and tool was in their hands, they would be all about it. Those who are dismissing them as not wanting to get out of lazy boy or they're in, it's like you're just allowing them to stay in their environment. And if you expose them to these things, man, they really have a thirst for it. And I'm embracing it. Even my children, like I said, my son playing football or my oldest who was playing baseball, he loved going to a pitching coach and to a batting coach and all these position coaches and learning the details. It's like, roll them into the fire service. They already have that mindset of like, yeah, man, this forcible entry class is like your hitting coach. This hose work is like your pitching coach. You're going to learn the disciplines and the details of these, and then we're going to go play the game. So I'm really excited as a training chief. I could not be more motivated about this generation that's coming in and learning how to figure that. But a lot of that is back to the education, and I can pull from the shelf like, training and development certification program through University of Oklahoma, taking higher level classes on adult education, because that's so much different than just teaching kids, and trying to really dive into my position as someone who is really responsible for training and development and understanding how people learn, and engaging them, understanding reps, not overcoaching. It's a really, really interesting kind of dynamic. But with that being said, I truly believe that the generational transition is playing into the strengths of making those connections like you're talking about, James. I mean, it's really, I'm all fired up now because you want to have that type of conversation.
Well, firstly, my son has a record player and everything from modern music to Elton John. So mirroring exactly what you've experienced. And I think it's amazing.
What are the albums that you share? What are the albums that both of you guys really enjoy listening to?
I've moved so much, so I don't have any records because they don't do well in suitcases when you move transatlantically. So, yeah. I had, like you, I had CDs, I had cassettes, I still have a few, but we do. What do we listen to together? A lot of, actually, there's modern music that he introduced me to, like NF. I don't know if you're familiar with him, hip hop. And God, what's the, it's going to fall totally out of my head. But there's a country guy, kind of emo country guy that he really likes that I think is good too. Anyway, I digress. But it illustrates what I shared about a year ago now. There was a Wall Street Journal article on how Gen Z are leaning into the trades. Mm-hmm. And the reason is, if you're a young person today and you Google, is it worth going to college?
Yeah.
If you're not trying to be a doctor or a lawyer or some of these other things, it's going to tell you, well, you're going to have $60,000 worth of debt and a piece of paper that doesn't guarantee you a job. And
Yeah.
these young people have all the information at their fingertips, and they're like, all right, well, then what about a welder? And they look at, well, 1 year certification, and now you can earn six figures. And well, that really sounds a lot better, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I think this is what's so exciting for the fire service. But what we've got to understand is we've got to separate the love of the job and exactly what you're talking about. Are these young people going to be excited about the fire service? I could not agree more that that's exactly what you're going to see. This, real pride in this profession. They're not only using their hands, but they're actually using it to save lives, which you're not when you're welding or plumbing or an electrician. But they also have all the information at their hands to find out if the fire department next to them is a healthy culture and a healthy, working environment, and is staffed properly. Or, like, as I sit here, is it 56 hours a week, woefully understaffed, revolving door department, mandatory overtime, suicides? That's front and center to these young people. Oh, yeah. And that's mistaken into, kids don't want to work anymore. I could not disagree more. Kids want to work, but they're not idiots. And if the working environment means that you're never going to see your family, there's a high chance that you might get mental or physical health issues, then they're going to weigh that up with welding and go, well, I'm going to be a welder then, because I can be home every night, still make decent money. But I think we're killing that desire to serve with, by refusing to address the things that are broken in the fire service, not the profession itself, but the way that we work our young people.
I agree. And, this is a tough thing. And because we have such great conversation, and this highlights, again, like you're saying, the access, because of social networking, because of a lot of these types of things, and because of Google searching and AI, and people can learn a lot more about the fire service before they get involved in it. And when you think about all that's out there, it's like, while I appreciate the explosion of discussion on the details of our jobs in peer-to-peer situations where we are talking about mental health, and we are talking about fitness, and we are talking about schedules, all those peer-to-peer conversations are also getting message to, those coming into the fire service. And, when, like you're saying, when they are doing a search on what's it like to be a firefighter, if what's trending is mental health problems and cancer and all these different types of things, then it is a turnoff. And, I just did a podcast with Corley, and I truly believe that the disease is a purpose problem. The symptoms are poor leadership and mental health and all that. Like, if we focus on our purpose, which is saving lives and doing great things, then kind of maybe we will start to balance those things out, and we will draw people into it who are more energetic. And you're not wrong. Workload is a major factor. When you look at, granted we get to sleep, but you're still engaged in work, and 16 hours more than the traditional workforce is a major demand, especially when you multiply that out over a year or multiple years. But I haven't given up hope, and I think being purpose driven will create a purpose driven culture, which will create purpose driven people. And as Robert Burns says, the purpose of life is a life of purpose, and we have to know what we're in it for. And if we know what we're in it for, then we know what we're willing to sacrifice for it. But when you're in it and it's just grinding you, and I've heard it, what am I doing here? I'm just getting beat up, and I'm just getting worn out, and it's just costing me time away from your family. The decision is clear. If you don't know what you're there for, then go be where you want to, go to what you want to be there for, and that's your family and all these other things, and you'll start to make those concessions. But man, I'm here to save lives and impact people, both directly in my service and then indirectly, hopefully for generations, by doing things like we're doing today and working with guys who are about to start their first day on the job.
I'm about to write a piece. I did one today, funnily enough, and it was on fire service trolls. AI is great. I made a little action figure, and it was a fire service troll, and it came with a CPAP, divorce papers, social media, and a bottle of whiskey. And it's tongue in cheek, but it's so true. Like the ones that oppose the proactive changes that will increase longevity and performance are usually the ones that are struggling from the things that we're trying to change. You know what I mean? They literally are suffering from. And then it's crazy. Like when I started in the fire service, I never saw a single CPAP. Now bunk rooms look like a bar in Star Wars. There's so many hoses lying around everywhere. And that's not normal for someone in their 30s or 40s or 50s. Like we're supposed to be healthy human beings. So, but when you reframe it with a performance lens, it changes the discussion, but the solutions are still the same. None of our sports stars are not sleeping 3 or 4 times a week. You know what I mean? None of our sports stars are told, well, we don't need to have a fitness standard. You can be a fat hockey player. That's fine. You know what I mean? So when you switch it around, you know, when we talk about being the best on the fire ground, being the clearest thinking paramedic, then everything that we do is set against that. So when you have the performance conversation, it's like, well, we need rest and recovery, the same as our Navy SEALs have, the same as our favorite sports stars have, so that we can operate at the highest level, so that we don't miss that child on a primary or push the wrong med on a PD code. And I think that then takes away, because there's almost this conversation as though it's like a victim mentality when you're asking, hey, can we go to less firefighter funerals? Now, that's fucking lunacy to me, because I hate the last calls and the bagpipes to this day. But if that's not enough to make people have this conversation, well, let's flip it around. You talk about being the best, you're talking about being for them, but you're fighting an environment to be a good firefighter. So either way you look at it, when we address these areas of the work week and fitness standards and, you know, access to mental health tools, that is forging higher, you know, performance as a firefighter or an EMS.
Yeah. No, yes, I do believe that there should be greater attention to our performance. I will, being obviously a chief, you know, I have an organizational responsibility and an administrative responsibility too. And I appreciate the push from the ground level guys, and we hear about the firefighters asking for these things and of the organization. But at the same time, like, the organization can only provide so much, especially in this situation. You know, while we do have you for a 30-year life here at the department, a lot of these factors are lifestyle choices. You know, so like, while we can try to improve your sleep at work, we can't control what you're doing on your off days. You know, and one of the greatest contradictions I always point to are the firefighters who are talking about PFAS gear or these carcinogens at the same time that they have Copenhagen in their lip and they're chewing. And it's like, okay, so you're not okay with occupational cancer, but you are purposely choosing recreational cancer. And so it's a really, really tough thing. Whereas your high level athletes, they know 100% that their body is their paycheck, you know, and they're going to do their best to do these things. When we talk about performance in the highest level of the military, it's like, well, yes, I mean, the military pretty much controls them basically 24/7. So we are in this weird thing where, yes, there's a very high expectation of our performance, and the organization should be investing in that. I've also been in the fire service for 30 years, and I will tell you, man, the tools and commitment to these things has never been greater. You know, I came on where pots of coffee and packs of cigarettes were kind of what judged how great of a firefighter you were. And we've come a long way. I mean, guys really are dedicated. I think overall in the nation, drinking is down, physical fitness is up. These GLP-1s are obviously changing a lot of things. So, I mean, it's a slow ship to turn. I think we're headed in the right direction. And the most positive part of that is having more discussions about it, increasing awareness. I mean, since you've been talking about shift work, look at how many departments you've seen make the change. You know, is it enough? No, it's never going to be enough for us who are doers. But I mean, there is a lot more personal responsibility in this game that I wish we would be championing more as well. But yeah, this is an interesting conversation. And it needs to be balanced. I fear that there is And I don't think we believe it as, I don't think we see it as negative talk. I think we see it as real talk, but the real talk and is having an impact on our recruiting opportunities and how people are viewing our work for sure.
Well, I think that's where the performance comes in. I agree that the danger is it becomes, victimy, and the same with the mental health. If you want to really make a big difference on the mental health, you talk about performance. Because if I want you to be able to operate at the highest level when someone is dying, I need you to be well rested. I need you to have done work on yourself. So, counseling, breath work, meditation, so that you are able to downregulate when you're at a high stress level. Now, those same exact tools and roads are going to lead you to better mental health overall, less depression, less anxiety, less chances of suicide. So that performance level is right there. So I think the result is the same, but the messaging definitely can be changed. But it's the black and white conversation, for example, I've heard for a long, long time. Well, if we give them more time off, they're just going to work more. Well, let's break that down. If you're an understaffed department and you're telling those people you need to stay, that's air quotes, working more. Well, no, that's ridiculous. That shouldn't be happen in the first place. But if you're telling a firefighter that they've got a 72-hour period between shifts, that they shouldn't be shaping surfboards or personal training or coaching when they go home, have dinner with their family, and go to bed every night, no, that's wrong as well. So it's never one or the other. It's both. If we're going to create a healthy work week for a firefighter, then they have to understand sleep hygiene at home. They have to understand the kinds of job that they can do, and you can have it in paper, the kinds of job you can't do. Don't work for another fire department. Don't work overnight on an ambulance. Don't work a midnight shift in an ER. But if you want to, do whatever it is you love to do, landscape, build cabinets, then there's nothing wrong with that at all. But that then says the department will take responsibility and the individual will take responsibility, and the combined result will be everyone wins. Versus like you're talking about, well, it needs to be all you, or no, it needs to be all them. And that's never going to fix anything.
And that's with everything we've seen. Right. The most effective things through the fire service are always, joint labor management projects, where both sides are heard and both sides contribute. It's rarely is anything 100% successful when it's driven by administration or by the membership, so it's the same thing in our house, man. It's like, I think Aaron Fields was the one who said it. He's like, my marriage isn't 50-50. My marriage is 100% and 100%. The only way we're successful in a relationship is if each person is giving all they can to it. And that couldn't be a more powerful statement in pretty much any relationship. And that's even with your own relationship with the job. It's like, man, you kind of have to be 100% into it and 100% recovering from it. And that's the only way you're really going to find that true balance. But, I can share a personal story with you. And I think that this kind of is, I feel lucky to have experienced it in this way. But this summer, I had a unknown virus attack my heart. I ended up with it's called viral myocarditis. People are really familiar with pericarditis, where a virus inflames the tissue around the heart. I ended up with a virus that had gotten into my heart muscle. I was basically going into heart failure, but it wasn't showing up on the EKG at all, because an EKG shows an ischemic heart attack, will show electrical abnormalities. Well, my basically heart attack was inflammatory. The muscle was working, but it was so inflamed that it wasn't pumping, and my cardiac capacity had gotten down to 30%. I spent a few days in the ICU, a total of a week in the hospital. Was in a situation where, at the end of it, the physicians pretty much said, hey, here's how these things work. Either your body beats the virus or you go into cardiac arrest, because we can't really treat a virus that we don't know. And we really have a hard time treating viruses in general. So it's just a waiting game with you. And that's what you went through. And at the third day in the hospital, I lost the fever. I beat the virus, and I'm still, being treated for it. But what was wild about that experience is I was going through it, and as out of it as I was, they kept telling my wife, there's nothing your husband did. There's nothing your husband did to cause this. There's nothing your husband did to deserve this. This is just a random thing, that caused his heart to do this. But when I did get discharged and they do start talking about all these things and they do start to get to know you, the cardiologist that was with me said, I really want you to understand that the way you live your life and everything that's going on is what saved your life. You are very physically fit. I had run a half marathon a few months before. They say you had low cholesterol. You obviously love what you do. You have a great family support. You seem to be a low stress person. So walking out of there, I remember looking at my wife and I think I'm like, what they just said was how I lived my life, saved my life. And I think so many people go through experiences like that and it's the complete opposite. It's like, whoa, man, thank God I survived. I got to lose some weight. Oh man, thank God I survived. I've got to change careers. Oh man, thank God. There's so many life lessons in it. It's, I haven't really, had this conversation with anybody, but I mean, in the setting of speaking with you and all that you do, I really wish there was more of these positive outcome stories with a positive input, because so many times there's no measure to what we do right. We can say, oh, that guy working out in the gym blew out his hamstring. That's an injury report. Or this person did that and it had a negative impact. Well, we don't see what working out does on the positive side because it's usually never measured. We don't see that your extra night's sleep maybe did keep your mind in tune to save that patient. We can't say that, your healthy nutrition. I mean, I guess if there's anything, my life was saved because of positive inputs and it's so rarely that those things are reported.
Yeah. This is the problem with, with the whole budget side again, like you said, supporting these proactive programs, because how do you annotate a healthy fire service? What happens is it starts to save money and they're all healthy now. And they're like, hey, well, then we can start cutting again. And, people don't want to work there anymore. And, then you start spiraling down again, rather than taking a step back and going back to the whole, who should be teaching fire chiefs on how to be at the helm. When you look at the proactive leaders in the corporate space, I went to Google HQ in London a few years ago. Their cafeteria in this particular case was free, but it was full of healthy food. They had gyms, they had daycare, they kind of make their own schedules. And a lot of the European countries now are going to 4 or 8 hour days, or 9 hour with a lunch, and seeing the same productivity, efficiency, ingenuity, innovation in their company. And so they're realizing how important their people are. And again, it's not probably an apples to apples comparison. They're just acknowledging that a healthy, happy workforce is going to be better for the company in general. And it's the same with us. A healthy, happy, fit group of firefighters are probably going to perform at a higher level and have greater longevity. I don't think we need to go to the lab to annotate that. Yeah. And the moment that you start saving money, you don't need to undo exactly what was working either.
Yeah. No, it's an amazing thing. When I worked at West Metro, it was a pretty large organization, and I was hired there when I was 21 years old. So you don't realize what you have until you leave it a lot of times. And they had a wellness division, and they had a full-time kind of physical therapist and wellness guy. And then he would often bring on interns and that type of stuff. And, I never knew any different. When our guys would get injured, they'd be put on light duty. You'd be working at headquarters, and then you would do your PT time with Bob in the basement in his gym, so you weren't, off duty and away from work, which is all the structure and all these things in your life that you value. And then you're going to a physical therapist that is just prescribed by the workman's comp people. You were still kind of nurtured by the organization. You were going down to see someone who very specifically knew your job description, knew you personally, and, kept track of your progress. And while I thought it was such a great thing on the organization, I'm also thinking about, well, that benefits the organization too, because you're off on work comp, but you're still contributing to the organization by doing a job within it. So they're benefiting by you kind of doing a job. You're there because you have some purpose, and then the accountability to your recovery and your physical therapy is a lot tighter. Because you're going to it in-house. You're not going to miss an appointment where you have to get from your desk and go down there. Your return to duty was very much coached, and it was amazing. And I can't imagine how much money that saved the organization by keeping it internal, because you won't ever be able to measure it. But you definitely have reduced lost work hours because the person's still contributing. You're definitely getting that person better care because it's somebody. And then once you build that with Bob, he's there all the time. So you have a nagging thing. You just like, oh man, my shoulder, whatever. You're going to see him and he's providing you feedback and input on how to prevent that from being a labrum tear or something like that. So it having a wellness division in-house was absolutely amazing. I didn't realize how rare it was. But again, hopefully some people can see that in time. He would always say, hey, if I can at least justify my salary, but he expanded it so much by taking on college interns that were, looking to do work in that field and everything. So, I mean, his division definitely probably made money, saved lives, saved injuries, all unfortunately intangible, as you say, but definitely recognize the internal value of it.
We did a strength test in the gym this week, and the deadlift day, I did 5 reps of 315. Now, the reason I mention that, because Marcus Wall was on the show, the world's strongest firefighter, who just deadlifted 1,000. So I know my numbers aren't impressive, but I think it was 11 or 12 years ago now, I had a near career-ending back injury. And, usual workman's comp experience. Well, here's a bunch of pills. And then, everyone I knew that hurt their back ended up in surgery. Luckily, having a background as an athlete and a coach and an ex-phys major, I was like, okay, this is bullshit. We're not doing this. If I got hurt because there was a mechanical deficiency, then I need to figure out what it was, fix that, and then use movement to fix everything else. And through chiropractic and PT and gym sessions and foundation training, I got back to work in 6 months, no surgery, no meds, and apart from basically paying my salary when I was gone, almost zero expense to the department or to the workman's comp people. And going back to what you're just experiencing yourself, the road to recovery should be a full-time job. It shouldn't be 1 hour 3 times a week. You should be in there for multiple hours every day. You look at these, sports people that you admire when they get hurt, what their day entails. The Thor 3 program that the Army Green Berets have. It's the same thing. It's an all-in, whether you get hurt or even on the preventative side. So, to your point, I think that's so important because we are tactical athletes, and if we're talking about performance again, to have you, which is my experience, go to a physical therapist who works with mainly geriatrics, they have no idea what's required. Maybe on your very first shift in the very first hour, there was a 30-story hotel next to my station with 100 pounds of high-rise, strip on my back. That could have been the very first call. So when you really have a proactive, well-versed physical therapy program, strength and conditioning program, it might seem like it's taking longer, but to your point exactly, if you had it where the firefighters were going to that facility, then they understand because they don't have a background as a coach or an athlete or an ex-phys major. Then they're led through, no, we're going to be doing several hours every day because we want you to not only come back to work, we want you to come back stronger than before you even got hurt.
Oh, exactly. I mean, and that's one thing one thing I've witnessed, even just like, what do they call it? Prehab now, like there's a lot of programs where they'll actually delay your surgery by a month or two, and they'll get you with somebody to say, hey, we'd really like you to work on these muscle groups prior to your surgery, and you could benefit from losing 15 pounds. So let's just go ahead and schedule this. If it's I won't say an elective surgery, but if it's a non-emergent surgery, I've seen doctors kind of take that approach to getting a person in a better position to be successful in their rehab by calling it prehab or whatever it may be. I'm not sure if you're kind of familiar with some of those programs.
Yeah, no, exactly. And then what you find sometimes is you start doing prehab and then you're like, okay, it actually doesn't hurt as much anymore. Then you realize that, strength and conditioning may be all that was needed in that moment.
When I was discharged and I was talking to the, because this was an inflammation issue, it's not just a light switch. My cardiac capacity actually, I was discharged like around July 3rd or something like that. I went for a follow-up 3 months later. So it was September. I went back for a follow-up echocardiogram, and the lady's like, we've only seen nominal improvement in your cardiac, your ejection fraction, your cardiac output. We've really got to do something more. And I was like, well, I had been going to work. I was working out. I was doing all these different types of things, and I was taking the medications. And she ended up basically doubling the medications. Some of it was medication driven, but then she's like, we really got to take a more holistic approach. She said, medicine can only do so much. We really want you to get strict on this anti-inflammatory diet. And I mean, I eliminated pretty much everything: dairy, sugar, red meat. I mean, it's the most strict diet that I've ever followed. And they put me on that for 2 months. And I remember leaving the doctor's office and talking to my wife about it. I'm like, I don't know what to do here. This isn't normally how I do things. And she's like, well, let's go get a book and let's try to figure it out. She's like, but you have to consider this just another medication. This is, she's prescribing you to do this. You have to be fully committed to it, never miss a dose, all that type of stuff. So I went all in. I continued to cook for the family how they would, but I mean, even to the point where I had to make my own flour. I couldn't do flour because you're basically gluten free. So I was mixing this combination of almond flour and brown rice flour, and I did it for 2 months, and my ejection fraction improvement between the medications and this and my physical fitness routine, I ended up exceeding the doctor's expectation. I went, had like a 20% improvement where he was only expecting to see 10. And that's just really made me a firm believer in all those types of things. Now my heart is near normal function, but I still stick pretty strict to the diet, and I feel better. I'm not as fatigued, a lot of these different types of things. I still enjoy a beer when I'm out with my friends, but there's, pretty much no, just additional alcohol or any of these other types of things. And it's just, having gone through this and having realized holistic wellness and how important it is, and then also just enjoying what you're doing, it's been a real eye opener.
Are you on days now, or are you working shifts?
So I'm on days. I work 4 10s, and that's been kind of my role since I moved into this position in the training division. And I can't tell you how important that was and how blind I was to that. Years and years on shift. Even when I was at West Metro, I was on the list to go to a day position for a couple of years, and I would dodge it and avoid it. Because my ego was driving me, like those guys in the desk, they're not real, they're goons and, all this type of stuff. But gosh, dude, the structure, that a 40-hour week provides. And I was on a 48-96 schedule. It was a great schedule. It was the best thing at the time. I loved the fact that I'd walk out of the firehouse and I'd have a 4-day. It was really great. It wasn't that up and down of the 24s or anything like that. So I believe we had a great schedule. We had a great culture. We had a really good environment. We were a very busy organization, but man, me being in a 40-hour week position, it is amazing. Gives you so much more structure and control over your diet, over your sleep, the family side of things. I mean, I am, if my kids are off for Martin Luther King Day, so am I, because the city's closed. So it's like all our 3-day weekends always line up. I know it's not the street cred that being on a rig getting hammered is, but for my longevity, being in days is something that I probably shouldn't have avoided. And it's probably something that firefighters should take advantage of throughout their career when they have the opportunity. If you have the opportunity to do some time in in training, I guarantee you'll get some years of your life back, even if it's in the middle of your career, because of the things you can control. I mean, that's what leads to so lack of control leads to anxiety, lack of control in our diet leads to poor nutrition, lack of control in our sleep leads to fatigue. Like they all have compounding downsides. So structure is a big upside to all these things.
This is something that really, it's literally what made me start the podcast. When I heard Kirk Parsley, the Navy SEAL turned physician, who was their SEAL on the West Coast teams, their doctor on the West Coast teams, talking about the impact on our cognition, like how dangerous it is when you haven't slept for 24 hours, God forbid 48. But then the long term, how it's directly correlated to cancer, to, mental health issues, addiction, obesity, testosterone depletion. And, it's unavoidable when you're asking a profession to be awake all night, which is why I am an advocate for the 24/72, because at least every 24 that you're up, you get a full 72 to recover. And if you just take a day off, now you've got a week. But for our firefighters, especially that have severe, struggles mentally, or, have had a cancer diagnosis and are battling that, like understanding that not being on shift work when you're going through treatment, and ideally maybe even not after, if you're susceptible to that particular disease, needs to be a conversation. And we don't highlight that enough. Again, it's not doom and gloom. We can deal with 24s if we have enough rest and recovery. But when someone has gone through a cardiac issue, a cancer issue, that needs to be part of the treatment plan. Is there a way of keeping this person on days to make sure that they don't, regress and go back to a dangerous arrhythmia or even another cancer?
No, I completely agree. I mean, that it's an amazing thing, because like you're saying, so many things start out as choices. Oh, I'm going to stay out tonight, or I'm going to bid this station and get some experience, or I'm going to pick this meal. Like they're choices, but then, as you're saying, kind of before long, those choices get beyond our control. When our terrible sleep pattern starts to affect cortisol levels and starts to affect testosterone levels, and starts like now you're jacked up on a cellular level, and you can't make decisions out of that. Like it, so there, that you're right, man. We need to, again, be looking at as many things as we can. Could this person, and it's tough with organizations, because obviously the cost of overtime is terrible. That when we look at most fire department budgets, I think my chief will tell you it's like 88 to 92% of most department budgets are personnel costs. So that means that there's only 8% to 12% of the budget that's available for all these things that we believe in, but they do have a higher return when they start to affect it's just wild. I mean, we may never know what giving one more person one more month on light duty, even though they've been released by their doctor, might have long-term value for that employee and for the organization and retention and all these things. It's like, and back to your point, a normal doctor, this release to duty is based on them just walking around in society. I see that all the time. Our guys will have lifting restrictions and then they'll be cleared back to work. It's like, the physician doesn't understand that you going back to work is walking around with an additional 75 pounds on your body. It is you waking up in the middle of the night and going from a heart rate of 48 to a heart rate of 108 instantly. They don't realize that you're going to be out in the cold. So the work conditions are so misunderstood that our return to duty is just completely out of whack.
Absolutely. Well, I want to go back to your beginning of the fire service. So 16 years old, how did you even come across the volunteer fire service? And talk to me about those years that you experienced that.
So the town that I worked in, or the town that I grew up in, they had a combination department, and there was a paid fire chief, and then there was one paid officer on duty every day. And basically they kind of ran the station and all that type of stuff, but a call would come in, and they would just wait there. They'd fire up the truck and they'd wait there, and then people would respond in their personal vehicles to the station, and that would basically fill out the truck. So, you know, a lot of the captain would kind of pull out the rig and wait, and if a bunch of high school kids showed up and there was no other drivers, then he would drive the truck to the call. If a, you know, a guy down the street, you know, would show up and he could drive, then he would drive, the officer would ride the seat, and then us as kids would be riding as firefighters. So it's a Wild West kind of thing. You're like, does that really exist? And it's like, yeah, it does. You know, at 16 years old, believe it or not, I was in a structure fire, and I don't even know if that's legal anymore. Like, I'm pretty sure you probably have to be 18 to have an SCBA, but I mean, it was great. My dad had volunteered when we were really, really young. I actually don't even kind of remember it, but because of the friendships he made and because of the community, we were always around the firehouse for pancake breakfasts and such. My neighbor growing up was the assistant chief at the fire station, so I always thought it was cool that he'd be racing off and going, you know, to the firehouse and going on these calls. And then being a high schooler, knowing other high school volunteers, seeing that they got to get out of school to go to fires, it's like, man, that's just awesome. So I kind of got into it as like, hey, something to do that I thought was cool, and also a way to get out of school. And then it just connected with me, you know, all those like you're saying, being impressionable as a kid. That was the sweet spot in my life where I found what I wanted to do, and it was great. I, you know, went from there to I'd spend my summers doing the wildland thing, working for, at the time it was California Department of Forestry, now it's Cal Fire. So at 18, 19 years old, 20 years old, I was traveling the state in a fire truck, going to these major campaign wildfires all over, basically getting a tour of California and getting a ton of good experience. Going to these fires. So I don't know, man. I'm so lucky. But what's really kind of interesting, again, talking about your return to the trades, there's been a deep investment, at least in our state, I'm sure others, in vocational technical schools, to the point where, you know, at 16, so if I was a junior in high school, I could go start getting my HVAC technician certificate, you know, as a part of my high school program, or I could get my welding certificate. My son, in his senior year, he started a Firefighter 1 program. So in his senior year, he would wake up, go to the fire academy at the community college until noon. Then he'd eat lunch, and then he'd go back to school. He'd have his, you know, traditional classes, the math class, science class, something like that, and then he would play baseball. But his mornings were at the fire academy for his senior year, and I mean, it's awesome that he got exposed to that at that age. It was fully funded by grants because they're trying to expose kids to those types of programs. His girlfriend, she did the same thing, but she was in a esthetician school, so she came out fully ready to do that job. Some of his other buddies did HVAC or body work, or so. I mean, it's really neat. This is a cool thing that our school, our high school, and I don't know how many of them, but they say, you know, at Yukon High School, they say, our goal is for every student to be enrolled, enlisted, or employed when they graduate high school. And I just think that's a great thing, man. It's to have the skill sets to enter the workforce, to have the education to be enrolled, or to have the desire to serve in the military or some type of service.
I'm a huge fan of the mentorship programs, and, you know, I think it's a really great opportunity for a young person to figure out, you know, is this even what I want to do? Do I have what it takes? Am I there yet? Do I need to go and, you know, mature a little bit? And then if so, you know, there's all these pathways to fire academy and, you know, jobs and that kind of thing. Where it's interesting, though, is you talk to so many people on the mental health side. You talk to psychologists, you talk to, you know, neurologists, and some of these, the physical side, and you hear about the development of the brain, and when are we actually at a point where we would be able to actually deal with, you know, some of the things that we have to do, and the sleep deprivation and the horrors that we see. And the conversation is, the older, you know, the more you can wait till you become a firefighter, the better. Now I see, because of this recruitment and retention crisis, a lot of departments leaning into, you know, high schools, and that locally they've done that now, like that they're paying for all their EMT, for their fire, everything to get bums on seats. And the question is, from a responsibility point of view, like an 18-year-old HVAC technician, no
Yeah.
downside whatsoever. But an
Yeah. Yeah.
18-year-old firefighter who's then going to see some of the horrific shit that we see,
Yeah.
is that responsible, or do we need to maybe look at the law enforcement side? Assuming that we fix the supply and demand, we have large lists again, but
Yeah.
maybe, you know, actually being on a rig would be closer to 20 or 21.
Yeah. I don't disagree with that. What's interesting, I will say, is even though we have a lot of these academies and ways to get kids into the fire service, having or being a current training chief and sitting on hiring boards and these types of things, I will say that it hasn't really quite lowered our hiring age. They're getting the certificates and they're obviously getting exposed to it and they're trying to it. But when it comes to like interviewing, I will say that the vast majority of the time we are hiring. If it's an apples to apples, usually the person with a little bit more life experience comes across better in the interviews. I still would say our median age has come down, and I'll talk about, it's interesting because I was in the fire service, pre 9/11 and then post 9/11, and I did see a major swing in the age of hiring. So when I first got hired, it was a lot of young kids. And then I do remember post 9/11, around 2003, 2004, our fire department, the average hiring age was like 27. And I think that was a lot of people who were looking for purpose in life. They had maybe were working at Merrill Lynch or they were working in some other field, and things, the world impact that 9/11 had, they wanted to do something that was more meaningful. I think the military saw a major bump in enlistments. There was just a lot of people who were chasing dollars who then realized, what's really important in life, and they swung. But then, 2008 kind of saw the same thing, saw the financial crisis tank. Some people changed jobs. They wanted something more secure. The hiring age went back up. Well, then when the economy gets good, all those people who have, life experience, they want to get into these other positions, and our hiring age drops again. So it has been interesting. You're talking about supply and demand. It's interesting that you use that term, because I've seen that as a major wave in the hiring ages. When there is a lot of people seeking fire department jobs, and you're sitting in an interview, you tend to go with the 25 to 27-year-old who can tell you that they have some life experience and they understand things, and they have a little bit deeper resume than, I graduated high school, went to the fire academy, and now I'm here, and as great as they are as moldable, employees and influential and imprintable, they do lack some of that understanding of what they're going to be seeing and doing. And there's a fragility in that, I guess, if you will say. But man, I don't know. I'd love to fix everything, but we are just in a state where generational turnover and these other things. We're a small department, 80 uniform members, and we've hired 15 kids in the last 13 months. So we are seeing a major turnover. I've spoken with other departments, and they've kind of said that this just tracks back, that it was about the 70s. You talk about shift changes. It was about the 70s that most departments went from 2 shifts to 3 shifts, or, 2 platoons to 3. Well, if in the 70s, basically all these departments hired a third of their people, then we kind of see this every 20 years, 25 years, that we have to hire a third of the department again.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, because now obviously if we're going to the 4 platoon system, you look at the demand of the 70s in the fire service, no one would say anything other than the call volume has exploded. So, again, if we're talking about base economics and not working your people into the ground and creating a desire to be in the profession, then just like, and it's literally what I wrote in this post today, the giants whose shoulders you and I stood on when we came into the profession, that fought for everything from SCBAs to a healthier work week, that's us. Now we're that group. And do you just want to say, well, I did my 25, these kids just are weak and, all this bullshit? Or do you actually want to be like, all right, what legacy am I going to leave? And I think these conversations are exactly that. What what is not pulling people in our profession, what can we fix, and then how can we then create a healthy environment, whatever that looks like, from physical therapy access, pre and post injury, to fitness standards, to mental health, to work weeks, so that then now we have that demand. Because 2005, I was testing 04 for Anaheim Fire Department. In the written exam, there was 1,000 certified firefighter EMTs or firefighter paramedics.
Yep.
And I know from all the guys that I got hired with that it wasn't even just that. They had resumes, CDF experience, ambulance operator, explorer programs, trades. My best friend was a lifeguard in South Africa, hanging from a helicopter, pulling people from, shark infested waters. And these were the kind of people that you were competing against.
Yeah.
And that is exactly what you need in a profession where lives are truly at stake. So it's not saying, oh, you shouldn't be 18. It's literally that journeyman conversation. Is like, what can I do over the next 2 or 3 years to set myself up? So when I walk through the door and Brian is on the other side of the table, I can explain not only that I want to be a firefighter, but what I've done to show that I want to build the skill set to not only be operationally sound, but have the compassion and empathy that's needed to truly be a first responder.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that you do, like, we talk about, I mean, and obviously we hit on before, you said that compassion and empathy. I mean, that's not something that they teach you in fire academy. It's not something they teach you in high school. It's something you learn through exposure in life, and you develop. And that's why these Gen Xer hardcores like you and I cry at commercials now, is because like we've stocked up a bunch more empathy, but so you hit on something, and I want to talk about it before I forget, because you talk about how the calls for service are so much higher, and that's changed in the fire service. And this is kind of an interesting one too. Again, I feel like this is a missed opportunity for us in a lot of ways, and some of it's how we're articulating this with city management and stuff. So for example, it's like our communities always see like, oh, well, we now have this, they understand physical development. So if a bunch of neighborhoods and this, what was 700 acres in this part of town is now being turned into houses, we need to put a fire station there. They're good with geographic growth, but they have a poor understanding of just, density and volume as far as that goes. So it's like, okay, well, going to the city manager, our community is getting higher density in its population and all this type of stuff. Have you added any trash routes? No, we haven't added any trash routes, but we have increased our trucks because they're having to pick up more trash because of more people. Okay, well, what about us? Like we're a landlocked city, 25 square miles. We have always and will always have 6 fire stations, but we went from 5,000 calls to now 10,000 calls in an 8-year period. But here's where it's always difficult, because we go to the city manager and we say, man, like, this is what we need. This is what we're dealing with. This, like, we should almost be patting them on the back, be like, hey, man, the economic development plans that you guys have come up with is great. We have so many more people in the city, using, and then, man, the growth plans that you guys have laid out for these apartments, they really are increasing our population. Like, so it's so funny, because if I see this as if I was a city manager and I had the fire department coming and talking to me saying like, we're now running 8,000 calls a year. We need more. And everybody coming to me and asking for more means that we're obviously doing the right thing. Our city is growing and it's prosperous and it's active. Like if you feed into the ego of, hey, what we're doing is right here, in the sense that we're having an increased demand for services within the city, because all that leads to more tax revenue, more all these things. We just have to support it. But as you're saying, if we don't support these things get worn out, and then they have a higher cost. It's just the same as your vehicle. Yes, the car is only designed to do 50 miles a day. If you commute 80 miles a day, you're going to wear it out faster. Yes, it can handle it, but it's only for a certain period, So the preventative maintenance for a city, for a county, for all these things in an increased demand for service is going to have to be an increased use of resources.
This is what I realized with this conversation, because I've said this many times. If all that it took was the people that we lose, the marriages that we see dissolved, the injuries, the mental health, issues, if that's all it took to change, then we would have changed it years ago, because it's rife. But where there's a great opportunity for leverage is to go to your city, your county, and say, how much do we spend on overtime? How much do we spend training a young person who then leaves 1, 2, 3, 5 years later? How much walks out the door that we've invested in that person? What are our workman's comp premiums? How much do we spend on medical, disability, retirement? And how much do we spend on line of duty deaths? God forbid. What about lawsuits? Do we get sued from when a tired ambulance operator or engine engineer hits a car in traffic, or a paramedic gets too rough or pushes the wrong med? Like, what are these budgetary, columns? How much is that? And I'll give you a good example. Excuse me, LAFD, it was in the paper a few months ago. Their overtime over the last 4 years was $1.2 billion with a B.
Yeah.
So then when you say, well, hey, this is, we're losing money, but I've got a great opportunity to change that. If we invest in a fourth shift, if we go to GMR and we do the 911 integrated telehealth system within our dispatch system, these are areas that we can spend a little upfront but save so much more money downstream. Mm-hmm. And I think that's how you have that conversation with a lot of these cities. I don't think that they care how many calls that we run. I really don't. But they care about the money. Now, you've got to handle it gently, because the subtext for a firefighter with no filter is, how the fuck have you not seen this by now?
Yeah.
You have to pull back and be the politically correct version of yourself. But can you just give me all the money in all these columns? Well, this is how much it would cost over 3 or 4 years to add an additional shift. We'll cover a 6-week Kelly year 1, a 3-week Kelly year 2, 24/72 with debit days, and then full 24/72. Now you've got a 4-platoon system where when we have our next hurricane or tornado or snowstorm, you've got another entire group of people. So you're not just, it's not apples to apples. You were wasting money with overtime. Now that firefighter that was working is not, tired because they just worked their shift, and you've got another person for the same money that you were spending on time and a half with a firefighter. So I think this is what's an interesting thing, and I'm not the expert, but it's articulating where the money is being wasted, and then coming in as the solution, like, hey, I've got a solution for this problem that I know you already know about because you're so intelligent. Why don't we try this instead? And then that's going to free up money for a physical therapist, a mental health practitioner, etc. Fitness equipment, which will then level up our savings even more.
And I think, like we talked about, like it's I think it's heading that direction. Like we talked about, it happened in the 70s. They went from 2 shifts to 3 shifts. I believe it will develop. In time. What was interesting, kind of talking about this, and you're talking about retention and stuff. Another thing that I look back on, and I took advantage when I left Colorado and moved back to Oklahoma, was a year leave of absence. So the department provided a 1-year leave of absence to any employee at any time. You could only use it once, but you were afforded it by union contract. And, I spent 14 years there, and I saw a lot of people take advantage of it. I remember one guy specifically, he was in the fire service. He'd always wanted to go to school. I can't remember what it was, but he's like, you know what? I finally have the money now. I really want to do it. I've saved up. I'm going to take a year off and go to school. And if it doesn't work out for me, then I'll come back. And so he was able to chase that passion, and he ended up, staying and not coming back. But another firefighter loved West Metro, but wanted to work in a city. He got hired at Baltimore. He went to work in Baltimore, ended up finding out it wasn't a fit for him. He loved working there as a firefighter, but didn't want to live there. He came back. I would say that it was around 50-50. I'd say probably about 50% of the people who exercised their leave of absence did come back. and the organization wins. Like they went out there, went to see if the grass was greener. It wasn't. They're back. You're not having to train a new employee because they have the stuff. You held onto their gear for a year, so they integrate right back into the organization with either a passion that they chased down and they felt fulfilled for. They didn't deny themselves of it, or they went and tried somewhere else or something else and it wasn't right for them, and they come back maybe even more invested. So that's a great like non-cost thing. You weren't guaranteed your position back. There had to be an opening, like you weren't guaranteed your rank. So if you left as a captain, you're risking there only being a firefighter spot when you come back. But again, I think it helps with, especially with our jobs, when you talk about the younger generations and stuff, they're not afraid to try something. And if it doesn't work out, kind of, because I think they've probably been more supported in life. But, I think it's a simple thing for organizations to pick up and say, man, we may not get them back, but we might. But look at, like you're saying, look at the cost of completely losing an employee, and all that goes into reinvesting in a new one. When it's not full retention, but you may retain more employees by allowing them to go spread their wings for a little bit and check something out.
Well, speaking of that, in my career, I started in Hialeah, which is an amazing department, very poorly supported, but the men and women that were there and still there, some of the greatest firefighters I've ever worked with. Then went out west because my wife at the time was in the entertainment space, so she kind of was chasing the Hollywood thing. Worked for Anaheim for a few years. We had a little boy, so then she wanted to come back, be close to the family, so went back east. So even though I adore the fire service, and I mean, I was a Tillerman on a California, Southern California truck. I mean, dream job. Broke my heart leaving. Best crew I ever had, and I've worked with some other great ones, but that was my absolute favorite. But it was always family first. And then ended up going through a divorce, single father, getting mandatory all the time, leave to a fourth department. Because you can't tell a single dad he can't go home to his son. Does not fucking work. So point being, I've moved around a bit. I've always prioritized my family. I've been through, I've been the rookie as I've got older and older and older with more and more experience. What was it that made you pull the trigger on West Metro? And talk to me about, the power of that decision when some people feel shackled to the department their entire career.
Well, I mean, I kind of viewed it in two ways. One was like, I mean, I felt so blessed by the experience that I had there. Like, I mean, it was an amazing department, like you're saying. Like the experience you just felt so good about it, and it was in a really tough place, and it was like I said, at that time the environment was really rough. To be in, and this was 2015. In 2013, I lost my driver, my engineer, to suicide. And I was, I didn't recover from that fully. I probably never will. But I was beating myself up at that time, so there was a lot of factors going on. But the greatest one was family. I left college and moved to Denver to take this job, and my wife was still in school. So we did the long distance relationship for 2 years. She came out of school, moved to Denver. So kind of always in the back of my mind, it was like, I made this decision for her as far as where she was going to live and all this type of stuff, because I led the way and I asked her to marry me. And while Colorado was great, it was a beautiful place. It maybe wasn't home for her. Her oldest sister, married to a colonel in the Air Force. They had traveled the world, all this type of stuff. He ended up getting stationed back in Oklahoma here at Tinker Air Force Base. Did 2 stints there as a colonel and then retired out. So when her oldest sister, her basically closest friend, was back in Oklahoma, she kind of was wanting to be back there. And I saw it as this opportunity, I've had a great life. I've had a great experience. I worked as a company officer for a long time, really enjoyed things, but at the same time was having this internal conflict of like, man, you lost your driver. to this. We'll never know the impact of that. We had these staffing cuts, which reassigned me to a new crew. It was just kind of like a time where I don't know if we're at rock bottom, but if we go much lower, I'm going to have a real hard time with this. Maybe I need a fresh start. I'll tell you, man, going from all those pressures, trying to keep morale up in a company when all these things are working on you, you're trying to raise the flag. I was really looking forward to going back to a fire academy as a firefighter and being told what to do all day long and not having to make a single decision and not having to do it. So nothing's by accident. It was a tough time, but it was the right time. And the relocation was good. We had been taking pay cuts for the last 5 years, so making mortgages was more difficult because obviously costs still go up, all these different types of things. So a lot of financial pressures, a lot of cultural pressures, a lot of family pressures. I will tell you, I think it was, God's way of saying, here's an opportunity to fresh start, and you should take it. And I remember sitting down with my wife and saying, you know what, it's 2015. I still have a good solid 20 something years in the fire service. I'm 35 years old. I can absolutely relocate to Oklahoma and have a full career. The timeline is fine. The cost of living is fine. We can relocate. We can do this. Let's give it a year. And I said, I'll test in Oklahoma City. I'll test in Edmond. I'll test in departments in Oklahoma. And if it works out, I'll take it and we'll give this a try. And we did it. We just put faith in it, and it all ended up working out. But yeah, I mean, what was interesting though is I remember coming out of the other side of it, me telling myself basically like kind of mentally, like you failed at that organization. It was a dark time. You lost someone. The company's collapsed. All this type of stuff. Like I was beating myself up over it. And I thought, well, I'm going to go through this fire academy. I'm going to be a firefighter, and I'm just going to ride out the rest of my career. Like, you did what you can do, but now you're, just kind of go through the motions, but quit on it. But going through that fire academy again, it really re-engaged my passion because I was surrounded by people who were getting it for the first time. And as jaded as I was and all this type of stuff, I couldn't show that to them. I couldn't be next to these kids who just landed their dream job and be like, oh man, it's all bullshit, kids. You're going to end up like, I really had a hardcore gut check on even day one or day two. And, it got me out of where I was, and it started me on a path back up. And I've never felt greater growth in my life than going back through that. In the 2 years that followed it, or 3 years that followed at Edmond, it was a long path back from the bottom. Unfortunately, I've had to experience that again a couple times as far as losing people to suicide. But, the profession has been good for me. The goal to lead has been good for me. I'm still as fired up today with these new recruits as I was when I was shoulder to shoulder with those guys in 2015. And that was after a career of, 15 to 18 years in the fire service. So, I don't know, man, that was my mental health medicine was starting over and really having that gut check conversation. You can say all you want, man. If I could do it all over again, I would. I put those chips on the table and I did, and I'm glad I did it. And I would do it all over a third time.
Firstly, what were the reasons that you were told for the pay cuts, for the demotions, etc.?
So West Metro was a fire district, so we were property tax based, and we were suburban. So the 2008 home housing collapse absolutely gutted our funding. So when people weren't paying their mortgage, when all these houses were foreclosing, all of that means zero property taxes being collected on these places. So the other tough side to being a fire district is your collections are, and here again, so you want to know what it means to be a chief. It's like having this level of understanding of your financial status. So property tax assessments are every 2 years. They're not annually. So in 2008, when the market collapsed, a lot of these houses were set at a assessed value that was really high. So we were supposed to collect these property taxes on this. That's what we had budgeted on. Well, in 2010, when all their values drop, that becomes your new budget. So like this 20% drop in housing value meant a 20% drop in our budget, and then that's fixed for 2 years. So you have like this retroactive impact of property taxes, and then it lasts for a lot longer period of time. So in 2014, we were still feeling the budgetary restrictions and impacts of this dropping off property value. So like we just keep going down and down and down. Well, meanwhile, fuel costs are going up, healthcare costs are going up, all this other, like there's no way to do it. And they call it like a ratchet effect, basically. And what was so interesting was when in 2011 or 2001, post 9/11, when there was kind of like this financial crisis because people weren't going into cities and all this stuff, we looked at cities and said, man, thank God we're not sales tax based. Thank God people not going out and doing all this stuff. We're based on property taxes, and housing value is always solid and property taxes are always solid. Well, we ate our lunch because property tax decreases didn't improve our budgetary situation, whereas the sales tax cities recovered so much quicker. So we ended up basically in, if you want to call it that, like a 6 to 7 year recession because of the housing collapse, because of the makeup of our district and all this type of stuff. So we went into a hiring freeze. So we weren't hiring anybody. That was around 2010 to 2012. We weren't hiring anybody. Then it really didn't recover much more. So we kind of had to tighten up the ratchet again. And basically on January 1st of 2015, we had kind of reached that point where we couldn't take any more pay cuts. We couldn't take any more. We had to reduce staffing, but fortunately there was no layoffs because we hadn't been hiring and there was guys retiring. So what they did was they closed all the double companies. So the places where I was with the heavy rescue had an engine and an ambulance there, they just closed the heavy rescue. So that eliminated 4 spots per shift. They closed another place where they had an engine and a truck company. They closed the engine. They closed a battalion chief. They closed an ambulance. So they cut 24 positions in a single day. And then all of those positions had their trickle down. So you close a battalion chief, that means 3 chiefs now move to captain. That means 3 captains now move to lieutenant. That means 3 lieutenants now move to either driver or firefighter, and it all just trickled down. So I want to stay for almost 3 years after that. There was a reinstatement list. So, if you lost your job as a captain and you were the most senior, then when someone did retire, you would just get bumped up. So we didn't have any hiring. We didn't have any promotional tests, and all those things have a major impact on morale and culture. I mean, hiring people is one of the greatest shots of motivation into an organization, because you have these people coming in that are excited, and then you have these people who have senior, information and intelligence to invest in them, and they're investing in them, and that gets motivation. So when a place is going through a tough time, and then you take away new blood coming into it, and then you take away promotional prospect, like it was like a trifecta of really, really hard stuff.
Do you know if they're back to the numbers they had prior to 08 or even more?
Yeah, what's amazing is, like, I will truly tell you, I left at rock bottom. And I in some ways I wish I could have stayed, because they came out of that just an amazing organization. They were before it. This was just a season in their period of time. It was really, really tough. But they ended up, it wasn't just them, it was people around them. So they merged with another district, Wheat Ridge. They expanded. They've added a lot of programs. Obviously, Denver is now absolutely booming as far as property values go. And, so they recovered and then ended up exceeding. They've added a lot of great programs. There's a lot of flexibility as a fire district. You aren't competing with the police department. So when things are good for a fire district, things are really, really good. Whereas even when things are good for a city, we still have to fight with Parks and Rec and police department for budgetary money. A fire district is kind of on its own, but man, when things are bad for a fire district, they couldn't be worse because there's no more money available. You're not getting sales tax. You can't do things to rally that. Obviously, you're transporting patients, but they're not paying their mortgage. They're not going to pay their EMS bill either. Man, it was a really, really tough time.
See, I'm glad that that was the response, because I think what we've seen for a lot of departments is that they made cuts around that time and they never added people back. They never added stations back, never added that fourth person back on the engine. And here we are now, as we talked about, this huge uptick with call volume, and then we're wondering why so many are so thin, and why that's then impacted recruitment, retention, etc. So I think that's another thing. And I don't know the answer to this, but everyone that's in a city or a county, what were the pre-08 numbers? What did it go down to? And have they actually replaced what was taken away before factoring the growth that should have happened? And if they didn't, well, that's another conversation you need to have with your people.
Well, and it's so funny, it's like that's one thing it's the greatest strength and obviously the greatest vulnerability of the fire service is when people say you're going to have to do more with less, we do, period. Like we just do, because we don't know it any other way. I remember Denver Police Department was going through some major budget problems years back, kind of there, and the police department, they're just like, yeah, no, we're not going to do that anymore. And like they have the guts to say it or whatever. So it's like, your car got stolen. Yeah, we're not going to come out and investigate. You can file a report online, or you can come down and do this, and like one thing after another, the police department says, yeah, we're not doing that anymore. We don't have the funding. And there was such a public outcry, people are calling the news stations like, man, my car was stolen out of the front yard. I called the police and they said, fill out a form online. It's like, so, but like, we can't do that. We can't say like, no, we're not coming to your house fire. We can't afford that. No, we're not going to come pick you up out of your bathroom. We can't afford that. Like, we just do it. We just do it. And that's, again, what makes us great is that people know we will always be there for them, but we do it at our own expense at the same time. And it's just a no-win situation.
Yeah. And I think that's it. That service is what makes this profession so incredible. This is why, 7.5 years after taking the uniform off, here I am still advocating for it, because it is an incredible group of men and women. But I've also witnessed, over 20 plus years, that I've been in it, or, advocating for it, that it can also be taken advantage of. And if we don't become our own advocates, it's not victim mentality to fight for an environment that they deserve, that allows them to be healthy, that allows them to operate at a high level, go home and to see their family when they're supposed to. So, like you said, that we'll do more with less until there's nothing. And that's the point. Yes. That's not high performance.
No.
Question about the academy. I had an interesting perspective, certainly by the third one. By that point, I had not a huge amount of time on, but I had 5.5 years. And all of a sudden, the game in the academy, you've seen it. You've seen the same instructors and, shouting at you and the baby's dying, all this stuff. So it just changes things a little bit. You're a lot more relaxed. I would argue enjoying it even more, because there's none of that, you can walk the walk in the gear. There's none of that anxiety. Can I rise to it? And so, you just show up every day and you do what's asked for you. And I would say it was completely different than that first time where you're just wide-eyed and, shitting yourself. What was that like for you? You had, quite a lot of time on prior. Now you come back, you become a rookie, you're in the academy. What was that academy experience, second time?
Well, it's like people joke, would you go back to high school? It's like, of course I would. Cause I know, I know the right path now. And as you said, it's like, you're going in the academy, but you know what's going on behind the scenes. You know the script. They're gonna. You know that you go into a drill that you're not going to win, because that's the point of the drill, and then you have these other guys who are just driving themselves nuts because they're like, they said to do this, they said to do that, they said, it's like, they're spinning themselves up trying to find success, and really the whole point of the drill is to not have success. So behind the scenes, but at the same time, you don't want to taint that experience for them at all. So it was really neat. And again, that's why it drove me to enjoy being an instructor, because I got to observe both the instructors and the students going through that environment, like in parallel. And, the students would come to me and they'd try to figure things out. And then like some of the instructors would be like, hey man, how'd that go? I'm like, man, this guy's about to implode. This guy's, handling this. So I'd give them a little bit more of the dynamics. So I was almost like an intermediary, for the academy. But it was really good. I mean, for me, it was low stress. It was what I needed, like, because again, the secrets, you're going to work out, you're going to be exhausted, but it was what I need. I had been in such a high stress environment, and it wasn't like, it's weird to say high stress because it wasn't high acuity. It was just like, weight. Like how there's stress, but then there's also weight. I'd been in such a heavy atmosphere for years that it felt good to just be in there and just kind of going with the flow. But I mean, with that, I did learn a lot. I learned that the instructional techniques of these guys teaching these classes who were just using ifs to PowerPoints and crowing through it was not matching with the generation who was used to seeing it on YouTube. Like, I mean, I remember coming out of classes and I could just sit there and kind of drone through it, because I mean, I remember going through an academy and it was just 60 ifs to slides and that's what you did. But the guys next to me, they got nothing out of it because the only way they learn is through video. And, you spend a whole day in a classroom and there's not a single video. As soon as we left, these guys were asking me, hey, is there any videos on forcible entry? Is there any videos on, and I'm like, well, yeah, but that helped me understand the modern mind of a student and in a lot of those things. So, and at the same time, I learned how to be a good follower. There's a lot of skills and drills that I could do better than these instructors. I had a lot more experience than most of them. But it wasn't my place. It was my place was to be a follower. And that was almost a relief too. You're putting so much pressure on yourself to lead in hard times. And man, that's a pressure cooker. Like, I mean, and I won't even say leading through hard times. I'm not going to give myself the credit to say that I was a great leader in that time period, but just surviving situations like that when you're in a formal leadership position, even just at the company level, is just really, really hard, and it leaves a lot of scars. But again, to be able to flip, right, nothing's by accident. I went through all that in order to be in a position where I had to be a very disciplined follower, and all these things have made me who I am today. And that's why there is a lot of talk about the heart of the fire service, but man, it's just given me more than it's taken from me. And I have such greater purpose because of it. And I won't blame the fire service for any hardship in my life. I'll give it credit for all the great things in my life, because even these lowest points have led to a lot of stuff. And I think, regardless of your opinion of like a Jordan Peterson or something like that, in other ways, like what he is really honest that life is hard. And I think too many of us, and especially, in this world of filters and in social presentations, life is hard, but in the hard part makes it that much more valuable and great.
What about probation? What I found was, a challenge of character was, of course, when you go to a new fire department, there are many firefighters that are, have more time on and more experience, have specialties that you're not even well versed in at all. But then there's also people that have far left that aren't actually very good on the fire ground that give you shit because you're a probie again. Just the reality of, someone who's worked for other places and starts from scratch again. How did you navigate that? How were you able to take a breath?
Oh, I mean, it is tough, because there's people who are intimidated by you. I wasn't just a rookie with experience, but I mean, I was teaching nationally and doing a lot of things, and people knew it, and it was a difficult environment. And you know, I I did a lot of soul searching, you know, and I didn't want those things to make me a failure. You know, it's like just I would try to exercise humility as much as possible. You know, like that whole course was just such a great growth for me. You know, I had to be really, really humble. You know, and I had to just accept. You know, I took ownership of it. I put myself in this situation. I decided to start over. I decided to do like I mean I'm not going to blame this person for being a jerk to me because uh, I voluntarily came here. No one's forcing me to start over and be a subordinate of this person. And then, you know, same thing to them. It's like it's not their fault. They've never had someone come in that they couldn't push around and tell what to do and have to show how to do everything. Like, and I guess I would just kind of try to win them over. It's like, well, you know, guess what? You're not going to have to tell me what to do, Cap. Like when you wake up at 6, your pot of coffee is going to be made. This is going to be done. Like I'll have your gear. Like I know how to make you happy. And I guess that's another part of that life experience is we can all say we're all different fire departments, but for the most part, all those same firefighters work at every department. So, you know, while his name may be different than her name at this department, or like I know this personality type. I know, you know, I know the difference between this 10-year captain and this 5-year lieutenant, and this like I kind of know what makes them tick, just the same as being in the fire academy. So I just had to navigate it, and I certainly didn't want, because I know at that time I was still looking at a 20-year career, and it's like I've been around enough firefighters who have ruined their 20-year career with their first month reputation, and I wasn't going to let that happen to me, you know. So it was tough to navigate, and there was some things, you know, landmines that you still step on that you don't know because of institutional or that type of stuff. But I feel like when I finished that first year and the Chiefs came to me and were asking me to put in for the training officer position, and that I felt like that was a testament to how I managed that 23-week academy and that first year, that they recognized that I might have something, and I was humble enough and calm enough that intimidation went to the wayside, and they felt that I could contribute to the organization.
Beautiful. I'm glad I asked that question. All right. Well, then, speaking of training, talk to me about Fire by Trade.
So Fire by Trade was, you know, basically like a training company that I kind of developed, you know, as a means to teach. When I was first kind of coming into teaching outside of my organization and region, I actually started working with Fire Service Warrior at the time, which was Chris Brennan. And we did a lot of kind of holistic firefighter approach training, mindset, physical fitness. So it was a great group. And then Chris, it's terrible. He was out in a storm on a call, took a tree branch to the head, and ended up suffering a traumatic brain injury that retired him from the job. And he, you know, we as participants and as instructors for him tried to continue Fire Service Warrior, but it just wasn't the same without him at the helm, and we were trying to be respectful. He needed to work through some stuff, so that kind of got shut down. But I still had this desire to teach, to expand, and I basically kind of Fire by Trade came from that. And it was just a training company. I was doing a lot of training, blogging. You know, that was when blogging was kind of popular. Through that. And I had done so much training in forcible entry and hose work that I was using a lot of people's equipment, and people were purchasing this because of our training. And that led to these companies asking us if we wanted to become distributors for them. So like Fire Hooks Unlimited and hose straps and pig tools and all this type of stuff. So I began doing training and then also selling equipment. Well, when I transitioned into the training division at Edmond, and then even more so this role as a training chief, I realized that I needed to invest my time in my people. It would be inappropriate to say, like, I'm going to take time off from the training division to go train these other firefighters and not be investing at home first. If I had something to give, it should be going to our own people. So I pretty much dropped off the training side, but we still do sell equipment, and that's a great way to supplement our income at home. My wife pretty much runs that business now. She's absolutely amazing. She is a school nurse at our school as her full-time job, and her second full-time job is running 100% of the fire by trade tools side of that, and it's been great. So I still love being a part of the fire service. I look forward to that being maybe an avenue for me when I do retire from this position. But I mean, it's been great. It's not too much. It keeps us engaged, and again, we've created a lot of really positive relationships with fire departments through the training, through consultation, and those types of things. So it's a means for us to get some of that time that we've given to those places back financially. No one's getting rich in the fire service, but it certainly is nice to at least break even and know that your time invested in these places does have a financial benefit.
Absolutely. So for people listening, where can they find the website?
So it's just simple, firebytrade.com.
Brilliant. All right. Well, I want to throw some quick closing questions at you before I let you go. The first one I love to ask, is there a book or are there books that you love to recommend? It can be related to our discussion today or completely unrelated.
Yeah, Deep Survival has always been my number one recommendation for folks. And I mean, there's a lot of other ones, and usually my book recommendation beyond that goes to kind of where you're at. A recommendation for company officers, a recommendation for this, but like the one that I always go to for even kids in high school to friends outside of the fire service to those in the fire service is Deep Survival by Lawrence Gonzalez has always been a number one for me. I think I probably bought it 15 different times because I've just lended it out to people so much. And what's enjoyable about that is talking to people after it, because it's one of those books that people get so many different things out of. It's like when you really get into a lot of other books, ones that are like Tribe or Outliers, these other things, it's like they're written for a very specific purpose. But Deep Survival is one of those that I think people just do some soul searching and deep thinking about life and getting through life. And it's great to have one of the most enjoyable parts is having conversations with people after they read it.
I had Lawrence on the show probably three or 4 years ago now. It was amazing.
Wow. I didn't know that, so now I'll have to listen to that one.
Yeah.
I can't believe now that I'm on a podcast that he was on after, so that's wild.
Yeah, he was amazing. Actually, I'm doing bonus episodes now where I take an old one and put it at the top of the pile again. So that's a good good suggestion.
That'll bump it up.
Yeah,
you can use my shout out as the prelude to it.
So what about television shows, documentaries, or films that you love?
This is funny because in talk about a way to connect with your children. My youngest and I have kind of become movie buffs, and it's I think it's probably because the older two are already out of the oldest is out of the house. My daughter's driving, so it's kind of like Luke and I are around the house a lot more. And in order to kind of pass the time, we've been watching movies, and it's been great because he'll hear about one and he'll ask me about it. And I'm like, yeah, that's good. So we've been watching all kinds of stuff, and one thing that I recently watched with him that I realized I had kind of forgotten about was Band of Brothers. It was a series on HBO about World War II. And, I can't remember even, I think we watched the movie Patton or something like that, because it was just one of those great legendary movies. We watched that and he was asking me about it. I'm like, you know what, we should watch Band of Brothers. I go, cause that's just an amazing series. The history is so great. My grandfather was in the Battle of the Bulge, so it was kind of around that and everything. So we watched that recently, and I would put that at the top of the list, not just for, kind of those connections to history for us to have the conversations with my son about his great grandfather and stuff. But man, how many leadership lessons are in that, and company level leadership lessons. And then just the the pure emphasis through that series on the non-commissioned officers, I really always kind of will say that is the company officer in the fire service. The NCOs are our officers. They're embedded in the companies. They're the peer leaders. They're not the formal leaders. And I highly encourage that one.
It is probably one of the most mentioned shows when I asked this question. Um, I had Shane, who played the medic, on the show, and then I worked with Captain Dale Dye when I was a stuntman in Japan. And he's been on the show, I think three times now. But yeah, so he was the one that taught them all the military training, and then he's the gruff
Oh,
old,
that's cool.
colonel or whatever he is with the little pencil mustache. But
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, it's just that, like you said, there are so many lessons in it, and that one phrase, you salute the man, salute the rank, not the man. I think that
yeah.
also pertains to the fire service, and ideally
Being a
you
good
can do both.
Yeah.
All right. Well, then the next question, is there a person that you recommend to come on this podcast as a guest to speak to the first responders, military, or associated professions of the world?
Man, I've been thinking about him a lot lately, and he's been an incredible influence of mine. Chief Dave McGrail. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he's probably most famous in the fire service for his standpipe operations, but the depth of life that he's worked through. He came in as a legacy fireman into Denver, which has its own connotations when you're trying to follow in your father's footsteps. His keynote in 2009, I believe, at FDIC was about complacency and vigilance, and the fact that his son suffered traumatic hypoxic brain injury in delivery because basically the labor and delivery crew was just not on their game, and the doctor, and it nearly cost him his son's life, and did, in the sense that cerebral palsy kind of impacted him forever. Chief McGrail, also just a very passionate person. He was a rescuer in a line of duty death at Denver Fire Department, and then he was also a command officer of a line of duty death. And he's just someone who has always risen above some of the hardest things that life can throw at you. But he remains positive, extremely professional, and just wildly influential. So I don't recommend him for some shows, but this format and just really getting to know someone on a deeper level, the way you have it, I think it would be extremely valuable, not just for you, but for so many people out there. So Chief Dave McGrail.
I heard him speak at the Orlando Fire Conference a few years ago, and I actually asked him a question which was totally loaded. How many floors should a firefighter be able to climb with all their gear? And he said, to the top of the tallest building in your city. And I was like, no further questions. But
I'll tell you, so Chief McGrail is twice at conferences. I've been in the hotel, and I've walked to get coffee or something, and at 5 a.m, he's doing stairs, like 6, 5 in the morning. Like he's been retired for maybe 6 years now or something like that, and even at conferences he still hits the stairs. I mean, he is deeply committed to routine and fitness and wellness, and that's what gets him through these tough times too. So
yeah, well, I would love to get him on if you're able to help me connect, because he's someone I've wanted to get on for a long time.
For sure.
Excellent. All right. Well, then the last question before we make sure everyone knows where to find you. What do you do to decompress?
I because I'm in Oklahoma, I have 5 acres. I love just being in my backyard. I love just being in space, even in the evenings. Walking out and feeding the cats outside and just looking up at the stars. And there's a lot of value to just being in nature. It's just absolutely amazing. I mean, the decompressing in that silence. I'll tell you, obviously physical fitness is a big part of it, working out and those types of things. But as far as truly decompressing, man, evening walks after dinner with my wife and our dog and, my son, a walk. We call it the digestion walk. We just take a walk in the neighborhood. But I think it is very much just it always kind of comes back to just kind of putting everything aside. As long as I'm around something, I'm the type of guy that if I'm not doing a million things, I don't feel like I'm doing anything. So I truly have to separate and disconnect. And I've always gotten that from being outdoors. It's like, I really enjoy reading. I love reading, a hard copy book in my hands, but all that does is just spin up my brain to think about all kinds of other things. So I have to just be outside, kind of just having a conversation or sitting on the back porch with a cup of coffee. So being outside and being at peace is where I find that decompression.
I do exactly the same thing. And it's funny, I saw a video a few weeks ago of someone asked, I don't know, some internist a question on social media. And she's like, if you need to pass gas, what's the best tips to do that? And she said, go for a walk. So ever since then, my wife now calls them fart walks that we go on. So
fart walks, I've heard that. Yeah. I grew up in Northern California, surfing and stuff. And, the water has always been on, but obviously in Oklahoma, it's not, I'd say if I was in the right place, where would you go to decompress? It would be in the beach and in the water. But, I think the core of it is just being in nature is what does it for me.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's just reiterate where people can find Fire by Trade. And are there any other places on social media they can also reach out to you? Yeah,
I have because I'm with Fire Engineering as a technical editor, I have a public Facebook page for myself, Brian Brush. And again, Fire Engineering, you can get a hold of me there. I'm not shy to share my email. It's brianebrush@gmail.com for kind of any personal stuff. And then through the department, our department is very proactive in sharing things that are working for us, be it policy, procedure, kind of anything along those lines. So if you want to get a hold of me professionally through work, it would be bbrush@midwestcityok.org.
Beautiful. Well, I want to thank you so much. It's been such an amazing conversation. We haven't talked about primary search or hoses or anything. So we obviously went through a completely different conversation. But I think people that know you and the journey that you've been on and the level of proficiency and training that you've had, it makes these perspectives invaluable. So I'm so glad that we got to have this type of conversation today. So I want to thank you so much for being so generous with your time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Thank you too, man. It is great to be able to share who I am on the human side, because so much of these conversations are based on the fire side. So I couldn't have enjoyed it more. I'm sure we could have done another 2 hours. So James, thank you for finally making the connection and us checking this box.